Hey everybody, it's Mahadeva, the OG Thunder Wizard. And today we're going to continue the reading of the book Shamanism for, quote, white people, unquote. I do that in quotes because I want to make it clear that I personally do not care what your skin color is or your racial background. But if you try to get involved into native spirituality of any kind, especially if you're getting into things like Native American shamanism or Siberian shamanism or things like that, then you will run into sometimes people who will want to point out the color of your skin. That was the case for me when I was in, of course, all my entire life, even when I was a born again Christian, I was still very interested in whatever the indigenous spirituality of my European ancestors was. Like most everybody else, I gravitated towards Druidism, and I read a lot about Druidism and that kind of thing. And then when I walked away from Christianity, at various points, I would want to go and read about the Druids or look at Neo-Druidism. For a while, I got involved in, I found a book called, what was it? Celtic Shamanism. That's what it was called. It was called Celtic Shamanism. And basically all it was is somebody had taken Siberian shamanism, which is very simply just taking a frame drum and beating it until you go into a trance, and then you travel to the three worlds and all of that. And I was introduced to that. And while I enjoyed the shamanic journeying, I did not have a personal connection with any of the mythology that was being presented, which was mostly Arthurian. The Arthurian mythology, which now I've come to realize, has nothing to do with indigenous Celtic anything. It was, it was a form of, it was like today if we were to go, we go to the movies and we watch Dances with Wolves. That's really got very little to do with Native American anything. It's a story about some white guy who decides he's going to help the poor, Native Americans fight against the other bad white guys, and it was that kind of a thing. It was mythology that was written in France in the Middle Ages, and they were talking about those guys over there in Britain, and they were trying to talk about but it was very Christianized and really had nothing to do with anything historical having to do with Druidism. And when I got involved in other things like with permission, I got involved with, and I'm a recognized shamanic drummer in the Yoruba tradition, and got involved in Taoist mysticism, and I'm a recognized teacher and practitioner of internal martial arts and Qigong and that sort of thing, and Taoist meditation and mantra and Vedic. So all of those things I got into in the proper way, having been initiated into certain traditions and being taught by recognized people in those traditions. But then when I came to the end of what I could learn from my Taoist teacher, and then I got kicked out of the sect because of political infighting and that sort of thing, I didn't know where else to go. And I thought, the only thing I can imagine that would come close would be Siberian shamanism. So I started looking into that. And one day I was on YouTube, and there was some college kid who claimed to be Native American who was outside protesting against a shamanic workshop. And it was people learning Michael Harner's version of Siberian shamanism, and he didn't like that. He thought that was white people stealing his religion, and I got very upset over that because there were so many inaccuracies about it. but I was so angry about it. For days I was angry about it, and I realized something's up. If I'm that upset, what am I so upset over? Some, snot-nosed, college kid who obviously doesn't know what he's talking about and is transferring and projecting his own, issues about Native American stuff onto Siberian stuff, which has nothing to do with him or his tradition. Why did that make me so upset? And I realized he was right. Because one of the things he said was, why do you need to practice our spirituality? Why can't you practice your own? The answer to that is because we don't have any anymore. Christianity is not our indigenous shamanic practice. And why do you have to appropriate somebody else's spirituality? And, it's, again, I have nothing against what I've done, which is go and learn from teachers from other traditions, in the proper manner. But what you ended up having is you end up having a lot of disenfranchised Caucasian people who want to experience traditional spiritual practices, and they don't have an avenue because you can't go. I mean, nowadays there's all kinds of things that are available, but when I was looking into it, and even before then, imagine going back into the 50s. Imagine somebody in 1955, trying to find in their, American city or in London or someplace else, somebody that's going to teach them authentic, indigenous, European anything. Wicca, that's made up. It works. I got nothing against it. If that works for you, that's great. But I mean, let's be honest, it's been completely made up. It's not based on anything. It's a hodgepodge of Germanic and pseudo-Celtic stuff thrown together. And we've got Western magic, which again was actually thrown together by looking at Arabian magical systems and the biblical things. So you're working with all of these angels and all this Abrahamic Christian stuff, and in my experience of that doesn't work for me. Let's just put it that way. So you can't go to the guy who's been practicing, whatever it is, our white people stuff for 2,000 years. You can't find it. So you have to go somewhere. And so people start pretending to be Native Americans because that's what they see. They like what they see. They listen to the way Native Americans talk about the earth and earth religion, and they want that. So that's the closest thing they have. So they can't go onto the reservation and say, "Hey guys, can I be part of your thing?" Because that's not how that works. So they just start putting feathers in their head and wearing fringed leather stuff and beating a drum and saying things in Lakota. I experienced that. I've gone to enough sweat lodges, which I love. I love sweat lodges, but people will start talking in Lakota and singing Lakota songs, and I have no idea if they've learned it from the proper tradition or not. So I get why the guy was so upset. Why can't you guys practice your own stuff? Because we don't have it anymore. It's been taken from us. We did it to ourselves. Nobody did it to us. We did it to ourselves. But we've disconnected ourselves from that. So the interesting thing, which we're going to talk about as I get into the reading of the part 3 of my book, I'm going to start sharing with you how the pseudo-Native American shamanism that people have created is actually their own indigenous practices. And it is in our DNA, it's in our unconscious, so that when we project it, we look at, we're looking around for something that looks, ancient and earth-oriented, and here are these Native Americans, they're around us. If you live in the States, they're, part of our culture. So we look at them, I'm going to be like those guys. And you start making up these practices. You heard them do this and you heard them do that. So you're going to start doing that. And you find out that that's what our ancestors did. In fact, some of the things that we attribute to Native American spirituality is actually deeply European. And it might even be more European than Native American, because Native Americans will say, lots of times they'll say, the stuff you guys doing, that has nothing to do with us. There's I was watching some movie. They were making fun of some white guy, and I don't know what he was doing. He was hanging out with some Native Americans. And they were out camping or something, and they were making fun of him. Like, why don't you go on your spirit walk? And they were trying to throw out these fake, pseudo Native American things, and making fun of the guy. And he was out doing that, and it was kind of understood that the implication was that has nothing to do with their religion. So we're going to talk about the things that people think are Native American are actually European in nature. And you don't have to run away from your own ethnicity. I know that you've been told, and understandably so by a lot of people, you've been told you're the white devil, and it is very true. People of European heritage have caused all kinds of damage, and it is an absolute fact that people of European heritage have repeatedly, continuously acted in ways destroying other ethnic cultures, and engaged in genocide. And so that is very true. But when you're walking around with all that guilt, how do you deal with that shame and that guilt and still do something authentic? And I have run into a lot of people, and there's no shortage of people out there who want to claim that they're Native American. In fact, there's groups of not only Caucasians, but African Americans who adopt these Native American tribal names and then seek to actually be given status as that's a real thing. People who engage in what's called plastic shamanism, which is people of European descent who unilaterally decide to become Native American in their practices. When Native Americans challenge them and say, you can't use our language for your thing, these people get very defensive and very upset and say, you can't deny my right to practice what I feel is, and so there's just a complete disconnect on all of this stuff. So we're going to talk about that, and bottom line is, I don't have an issue about what you practice. You can practice whatever you want. And if you have found a Native American elder who wants to teach you, I have no problem with that at all. Like I said, I've trained in Taoist mysticism and gotten permission from the gods of that tradition as well as people of that tradition. Yoruba, West African shamanic drumming, I've gotten permission from the gods of that tradition as well as the people and the masters of that tradition. Same thing with the Vedic practices and mantra and yoga and all of that. And then in the past 15 years or so, I've been working into connecting to the gods of my ancestors and learning practices that I've learned from studying mythology and finding the syncretic connection between practices that go into prehistory as well as my own take on it. So I don't care what you do. I don't have an issue with any of it. But I do think it's extremely important that we not come from a place of shame, that we not do anything in an unconscious with an unconscious agenda to run away from who we are. So if you're walking around with guilt, understandable guilt for the tremendous horrors that have been unleashed on the world by people of European descent, that doesn't mean that your ancestors didn't practice a very powerful indigenous shamanic spiritual practice. It just means that you have to accept that did happen. It's not you. But the way to heal that isn't to throw yourself away and become somebody else. If that's, I mean, you can if you want. I don't have a problem with that. But the point is that, you know, what I ran into a lot was people who had a lot of serious emotional, unresolved emotional self-hatred and shame. And so their journey into Native American shamanism was really about running away from themselves. And so you can't do that and heal at the same time. So anyway, I'm starting to blab on and not saying anything. So we'll just get to the reading of the book. So let's start with part 3 of shamanism for white people, and this is starting on page 44 of my PDF version. If you're following along, again, this is a book I've written. You can go to Amazon and just type in shamanism for white people and look for my book, or you can go to courses.thunderwizard.com and click on books. You can also go to michaelwilliamdenney.com and you'll find all my books there. So, starting with page 44, the subchapter called The Reader's Digest Version of Animism. For those people not familiar with the Reader's Digest publication, it is a publication that, among other things, was known for its condensed version of popular novels. So that phrase, the Reader's Digest version, that's not, you know, I mean, I haven't heard somebody use that in probably 20 years. But that, you know, 20, 30 years ago, if somebody said, oh, the Reader's Digest version, they would know what you meant. What you meant by that was somebody just taking the cliff notes and slamming them together and then reading it in this publication called the Reader's Digest. And people thinking they've actually read some book. When in reality, they just, you know, read a very short, condensed, superficial version of it. So the Reader's Digest version of animism. For those people not familiar with the Reader's Digest publication, it is a publication that, among other things, was known for its condensed version of popular novels. It was a way for a person to glean the basic storyline of novels without having to read the entire book with all its complexity and nuances. They were very similar to Cliff's Notes. Remember Cliff's Notes? Neo-shamanism tends to remind me of those condensed novels. Neo-shamanism is almost entirely focused on 2 limited aspects of animism. 1, trance vision experiences. 2, animist healing practices. I'm not seeking to denigrate these 2 practices. They are very important. My point is that traditional animism has much, much more to it. Neo-shamanism has boiled down the animist experience to only a small percentage of what is traditionally contained in complete traditions that can trace their connections into prehistory. Before I go any further, that was, again, we're talking about the neo-shamanism of the 80s and 90s. So the neo-shamanism of the 80s and 90s was that. Trance vision experiences and shamanic drumming. And so if somebody claimed to be a shaman, that's what they practiced. Nowadays, a whole new definition of shamanism has arisen, which is exclusively the use of entheogens, power plants, or even just the chemicals associated with them, having to do with hallucinogens. And I've shared this story a lot, but this was probably 5-6 years ago. And I met somebody who claimed to be a shaman. And so I said, oh, really? What sect? What school? And they looked at me like they didn't know what I was talking about. And I said, who did you train under? What tradition? And again, strange look on their face. And I said, okay, so what is it exactly that you do? They say, oh, I guide people through visions. I said, oh, that's interesting. What do you mean by that? Well, we take, and then, talked about whatever entheon of choice that I forget what it was. We take mushrooms, or we take this, or we take that, and I guide them through their vision. And I said, so you guide them while they go on a hallucinogenic trip? He says, yeah. I said, oh. I didn't know what else to say, because that was just like, what does that have to do with shamanism? And the assumption by a lot of modern people who throw the word shamanism out is that shamanism is all about taking entheogens, and that's what it's all about. And we have whole groups of, we have schools. You can go down to, well, not now because of lockdown, but you can fly down to South America and take an ayahuasca retreat, which, if you pay enough money, you'll find somebody who will prepare ayahuasca brew and then give it to you, and you'll sit in a circle, and that's shamanism. But that is not, number one, the word shaman is a Siberian word, and Siberians don't use entheogens. So when I talk about neo-shamanism in this book, I'm talking about my experience of the 80s and 90s version, which was all about just drumming and going into the three worlds. And I'm saying it's a lot more than that. But nowadays, it's even more, for me to say that is even more profound, because people think, completely identify the word shamanism with hallucinogenic trips. And you need to understand that that's the minority. That is part of some traditions. It's part of some South American traditions. But again, South American native traditions is technically not shamanism either, because shamanism is something that is associated with Siberian indigenous animism. So, point is, it's just a word, and we get all wrapped up, and every new generation comes up with a new definition of what shamanism is. So, let's get back to it. So again, the two things that neo-shamanism is almost entirely focused on is trance vision experiences. I'll make it three. Three things that people associate with shamanism is, number one is hallucinogenic trips. Two, trance vision experiences, which kind of goes with that. And then three, animist healing practices. All right, so I'm not seeking to denigrate these three practices. They're very important. My point is that traditional animism has much more to it. Neo-shamanism has boiled down the animist experience to only a small percentage of what is traditionally contained in complete traditions that can trace their connections into prehistory. We modern Westerners make such a big deal about trance-induced experiences and animist healing and label these practices as being exclusive to shamanism. But every traditional spiritual practice teaches these two skills, including Christianity, by the way. To focus on these two skill sets as the entirety of shamanism is like saying that auto mechanics only change the oil. Sure, the oil change happens very often, but there is much, much more to maintaining a car than just changing the oil. True animism in every culture has always been a deep and multifaceted practice where trance states and healing are but a small portion. Redefining shamanism. While it is my desire to see the popular use of the word shamanism change to animism, it is a regrettable fact that most Westerners unwittingly still use the word shamanism outside of its original context. The term animism is less well known and is not as cool, so it may be a long while before the misuse of the word shamanism has stopped. Until such time, those of us who know better can gently educate anyone we come across who uses the word incorrectly. I will continue to use this word shamanism publicly to gain attention to this issue simply because so few people are familiar with the term animism. I am letting the reader know in advance that it may seem that I am using this phrase opportunistically to gain attention. I am doing so deliberately because those whom I feel that need either be educated or participate in this discussion will most likely not be attracted to the accurate term of animism, much less even know what it means. Moreover, most people get their information from internet search engines, and if someone is unaware of the meaning of animism, they will simply type in shamanism into search engines instead and never find this information. So I am consciously and deliberately using the term shamanism so that this body of work concerning animism will pop up on their radars. So please forgive me if I contradict my own advice and continue to use the term shamanism in future teachings, websites, and products. I promise that I will always use the opportunity to re-educate people into the correct understanding of animism and away from pseudo-shamanism. So now let's examine the ancient origins of all Europeans. So again, this book was written 10 plus years ago, and so I was feeling very conscious of that and self-conscious of the use of the term, and I had made the decision that I was going to continue to use the word shamanism, but I could care less now. It's just a word. But I'm happy to talk about what shamanism really means as opposed to animism and all of that. But like I said before, everybody uses that word shamanism, so let's just keep using it. All right, Indo-European animism. If you are descended from anybody who hails from any part of Europe, northern India, Anatolia, Turkey, Iran, and parts of Central Asia, or even parts of the Middle East, you are most likely ethnically of Indo-European descent. The Indo-European language is extremely old. Until recently, we thought that the Indo-European language was at least 7,000 to 10,000 years old, but in recent decades, science has concluded that the Indo-European language is at least 50,000 years old. The first Indo-European speakers migrated into the northern hemisphere from East Africa and spread into all of the geographical areas previously mentioned. So the fact of the matter is that if you are of Indo-European descent, you can trace your language and pre-Christian animist religion all the way back to the first modern humans who migrated out of Africa. For more information on the genesis of the Indo-European people, Google the phrase Paleolithic continuity paradigm. So Paleolithic continuity paradigm. It's still taught today. I don't think I talk about it in this book, but it's still taught today. The inaccurate, completely inaccurate, disproven Aryan migration theory or Indo-European migration theory has been completely, totally discredited. But still, it was taught when I was in college. It's still being taught. People still talk about it. Even so-called scientists and linguists still refer to this assumption that for some reason that doesn't make any sense, the Indo-European people and the Indo-European language somehow sprouted out of nowhere somewhere in the steppes of Russia. And that the idea is that over the past 7,000 years, which when it comes to language and ethnicity is a drop in the bucket, for some reason over the last 7,000 years, these Indo-Europeans who came out of nowhere magically exploded all over the northern hemisphere, destroying all of the indigenous religions that existed beforehand and replacing it with their religion. And there's no fact to any of it. It's all conjecture, and it goes back to when the first Europeans traveled to India. Not the first Europeans, but in the 16 and 1700s, people from Europe traveled to India and read the Vedas and said, oh, that looks a lot like Greek and Latin, and there's some similarity to English and German, and so our ancestors must have come down here and started this. And so that's where the whole even the word Indo-European has this assumption that these Europeans came into India. And then what's happened in recent times, understandably, is that people of East Indian descent have taken umbrage to that, also because they lived through all kinds of racism from being having the English occupy their country for so long, and so they were told also, oh yeah, we're the original people here, and you're a mongrel race, but your ancestors were us. And so they understandably respond and rebel against that, but they make the same mistake. They operate from the assumption that, well, it's the other way around, that we Indians went up into Europe, so actually you're descended from us. And neither of those things are true. Those people called Indo-Europeans, there's a whole different story about that, which is that the Indo-European people came into the Northern Hemisphere 50,000 years ago. And instead of 7,000 years ago, these Indo-European horse warriors exploded all over Europe and imposed their religion and their culture, resulting in the Slavic, Celtic, Germanic, and East Indian languages and cultures. It's actually much different. Is that there was waves of Indo-European speakers from Africa that showed up 50,000 years ago and got landlocked in different parts of the northern hemisphere for tens of thousands of years, and as a result of that, each of their ethnicities changed and their language changed slightly. But the Slavic languages, the Celtic languages, the Germanic languages, other languages like Iranian and obviously the East Indian languages, and there's a few others that I'm not remembering, Hittite. Those were all the language, the dialects of Indo-European that formed over tens of thousands of years. And their ethnicity is different. You know, the reason why people from East India have dark skin and dark eyes, and if you look at their DNA, there's no connection between that and Germanic people, is because they've been separated from each other by 50,000 years. So their ethnicity and their DNA changed as a result of their environment. So that's why somebody can have the same language and have essentially the same religion as the Norse and the East Indians, but their ethnicity is totally different. So we're saying that our connection and our ancestry goes beyond our ethnicity, which is why I use the word white people in quotes here. People really need to get over this, and it's unfortunate because the academic community is still touting this false understanding, which is based on unconscious racism. And people don't realize how racist it is. And then, of course, when people want to counter that, like the East Indians do, they still use the same faulty assumption. And instead of saying, yeah, we're descended from white people from Europe, they say, no, Europeans are descended from us. Instead of, there's a third option, which is the one I just shared with you. All right, let's keep going. So that's what you learn if you Google the Paleolithic continuity paradigm. That's what you'll learn, and you'll find out that there's a lot of people in the academic community that don't like the Paleolithic continuity paradigm, and I think that's because of unconscious racism myself. All right, let's keep going. So as far as being an ancient animist culture, the Indo-European culture is as old and authentic as it gets. Now, of course, the ethnicity of Indo-European people has changed considerably over tens of thousands of years due to the adaptation to varying climatic conditions, but our language and animist religious concepts have remained remarkably intact. Our first Indo-European ancestors had dark skin, but after interbreeding with Neanderthals in Northern Europe, who carried the gene for light eyes, light skin, and red hair, and after migrating into harsh ice age conditions that lasted for 40,000 years, the original Indo-European skin pigment of Northern Europeans lightened considerably in some of the Indo-European tribal communities. This is why the Northern European branch of Indo-European people have their distinctive light skin pigmentation. But even though our physical appearance adapted to the climatic conditions in Ice Age Europe, our Indo-European language has stayed relatively intact since our first ancestors left the African motherland. Did you know that the oldest art in the world is found in Europe? Caves in modern-day France and Germany contain Stone Age cave paintings that are at least 25 to 30,000 years old. The oldest carved figurines in the world are found in the same region and date to this same period. The oldest musical instruments in the world are finely carved flutes made from mammoth bone and bird wing bones from these same caves dating back to the same time period. The people who created these artifacts are the ancestors of modern Europeans. They spoke Indo-European. This is your spiritual heritage. You do not need to identify with anyone else to tap into very ancient primal animist spirituality. Our ancestors are still with us, and they can be honored and sought after for spiritual guidance. And if you want even more fuel, especially if you're of Northern European descent, to feel connected to ancient people, you have in your DNA anywhere from 2 to 4% Neanderthal. And so those guys were in Europe for 100 or 200,000 years. So if you want to talk about ancient European knowledge, it goes back, at least 100 to 200,000 years. If you tap into your Neanderthal DNA. Now, let's take a look at the general beliefs of the pre-Christian Indo-European people. These fundamental core beliefs were held by all Indo-European tribes stretching from India to Scandinavia. Many of the concepts infused into New Age neo-shamanism, which are often falsely attributed to Native American shamanism, are already contained within prehistoric Indo-European animism. Once again, it is unnecessary to seek for these concepts outside of your own heritage. Let us take a look at some common spiritual concepts presumed by neo-shamanism to only be found in so-called shamanic cultures. Father Sky, Mother Earth, World Tree, Thunder Beings, Ancestor Spirits, Totem Spirits, Shape-shifting, Shamanic Journeying, Medicine Wheels, Vision Questing. These concepts are fundamental to traditional Indo-European animism. Since my ancestry is mostly Scandinavian, Anglo-Saxon, and Germanic, I will focus most of my examples in this area. However, the reader is encouraged to research any other pre-Christian traditions that attracts them. Sky Father. The Indo-European tribes believed in a Sky Father who lived in the North Star. By the light of the North Star, he guided all of humanity in their physical and spiritual destinies. In modern English, his name would be best rendered as Day Father. The roots of these two words are seen in other Indo-European names for this same deity. Deus Pita, Jupiter, Zeus, Tyr, Tiu, and Ziu, just to name a few. That's all one deity, by the way. And even in the first word, the D, Deus, that syllable of D is what denotes the sky, specifically the Sky Father. That by itself, D means sky. And so our ancient ancestors, when they said D, they were not just talking about the deity, but they were talking about the sky itself. So it's important to understand that original spirituality, there weren't idols. They didn't anthropomorphize the deities. That came later in, when you started getting closer towards the Middle Ages. And we still see this in East Indian spirituality, where a deity was originally, there was no idol for a deity. A deity was a yantra. So this is a yantra. This is a form of a yantra. In the Norse tradition, this is the Eyjolfur, but this exact, I mean that, this exact figure here, this exact drawing is called a Ashtanga yantra. It's no different, looks exactly the same. And it means means the 8-limbed yantra. So this is a deity. And the way that yantras worked is that, like the Shri yantra or whatever, you see them all over the place, is that instead of an idol, you had whatever the yantra was, and you'd have it on the wall, or you'd have it, carved on a piece of copper or something like that, which they still do today. And then each deity had a mantra. So they had a sound. So the sound for the Sky Father was D. If you just want to get to the root of it, if you just chant D, you're chanting the power of the sky. The sky was the deity. There wasn't a man in the sky. The sky itself was the Father, the sky itself. So there was no difference between the sky and the deity. So you see that in the term Deus Pita, which is the original Sanskrit word for Sky Father. Deus Sky Pita Father. Jupiter is the Latin word, and it's a contraction of Diu Piter, Sky Father. In the Norse and the Germanic, you see the earlier just using the sky itself, Tiu, Tyr, it just means sky. But that was the deity. So the point I'm trying to make about yantras is that yantras were the symbol, and this symbol acted like a grid. It acted like a transporter. like in Star Trek. When you chanted the name of the deity, or if you chanted the mantra of the deity, it activates this grid. And the deity is manifest through the grid. And so when you did that enough, the deity supposedly appeared. And then you could ask the deity for whatever you wanted. So our ancestors, when they worshipped gods, they didn't worship these anthropomorphized deities. And Tacitus is very clear about this. I'll probably quote it in here later on, but Tacitus is very clear. He says that when he first travels through the thick forest of Germania, which now it isn't like that now, but it was it was like a jungle. It was this thick forest with rivers and lakes and bogs, and you could barely get into the place. And then there were these really primitive, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, guys running around, doing whatever, these primitive natives. And he said they didn't worship in temples, and they didn't worship idols. They didn't worship anthropomorphized deities, that they worshipped the lakes and the rivers and the mountains, and whatever it was that nature presented, that was the deities for them. And this is seen in all Indo-European religions. You go back far enough, that's what you find. Okay, so, all right, let's keep going. The Germanic names for Sky Father show an even older Indo-European version where the Sky Father is simply referred to as Tiu, which is cognate with the words day, divinity, divinity. The Sky Father was the source of pure celestial power as expressed in the stars, hence his Germanic name Tiu, which could be translated as star, deity, sky, shining, or divine. Earth Mother. The feminine counterpart to the masculine Sky Father was the Earth Mother. There are different names for the Earth Mother in different Indo-European languages, but the fundamental concept still applied. The Earth Mother is the consort of the Sky Father. She gives birth to all of the creatures and most of the gods. In some traditions, the Earth Mother even gives birth to the Sky Father. The Earth Mother is often seen as a primordial force, even more powerful than the gods. She is the source of all magic, creation, and mystery. The oldest religious figurines in the world are Earth Mother figures found in caves in Northern Europe. These fertility idols, quote, are 25,000 years old. This indicates that Mother Earth may have been the first deity to be worshipped by modern humans. It was your Paleolithic Indo-European ancestors who very possibly discovered the concept of the Earth Mother. There was something I wanted to say as I was reading that. I mean, if I stopped every time I had a thought, I'd never get through any of it. So, anyway, I can't remember what it was, so let's keep going. Some examples of Earth Mother in prehistoric Indo-European cultures. Sanskrit, Prithvi. Germanic, Hulda or Hertha. Norse, Urd. Anglo-Saxon, Earth. Prithvi was the consort of Deus Pitta, the Vedic Sky Father. Now I remember what I was thinking. So in the 90-day challenge, I take you through a meditation Qigong practice called the Heaven Earth Qigong meditation. You don't have to do this to do it. You can go find it on my channel. But this practice does exactly what I'm talking about. That is, if I had to pick just one practice, I would do the Heaven Earth Qigong meditation, because it literally connects within you the powers of the sky and the earth. And then you become the conduit through which they communicate. They literally, join union through your body. It's the most powerful thing and balancing thing that I can imagine doing. So I recommend looking into that. If you're interested in having this connection of Father Sky and Mother Earth, which is, again, the whole point of it is that this is what all Native Americans and people who want to pretend they want to get out of their own culture, so they talk about, Mother Earth and Father Sky, and there's still this unconscious assumption that I'm going out of my thing and talking about what other people say, when your own ethnic background has this. You don't have to go anywhere else, and you're in complete agreement with all these other original practices, because I believe this was the original practice of all humans, not just Indo-Europeans. All right, let's keep going. Prithvi was the consort of Dyeus Pita, the Vedic sky father. She was the mother of both Agni, the sacred spiritual fire, and Indra, the thunder god. Mother Hulda, or Mother Hole, is the earth mother of the prehistoric continental Germanic tribes. Frau Hole is still celebrated in Germany today. Her name means hidden. Even to this day, German children are told the story of how Mother Hole brought an oppressed stepchild into her underground magical world through a sacred well and taught her the value of respect for life and hard work. The little girl respected the value of Mother Hole's world. As a result, the little girl was sent back up to the middle world with an abundance of gold. The wicked stepmother, seeing the gold given to the stepchild, sends her own lazy daughter down to the well, but the selfish daughter shows no respect for anything in the underworld and is sent back to the middle world empty-handed and covered in tar. This is a modern day myth that they still talk, they still teach little kids. And it's as shamanic as it gets. It's talking about the shamanic journey from the middle world to the underworld and the earth mother and all that. I mean, you can't get any more earthy and tribal. You can't get any more shamanic than that. And you don't have to go outside of your own culture to find it. In Anglo-Saxon and Scandinavian traditions, one name for the earth mother is simply Urd, or earth. We still use this word today to describe the life-giving soil beneath our feet, as well as the planet on which we live. But the goddess Earth was much more than just a fertility goddess. She was the primordial giantess from which all things emerged, including all of the gods and goddesses. She was the law of the origin of all things. The three most powerful forces in the Anglo-Saxon and Norse religion were Earth, origin, Verdandi, coming into being, and Skuld, future, past, present, and future. These three mighty giantesses were the threefold law of karmic action and reaction. Everything we think and do in this moment becomes an energetic pattern in the past, Urd, which influences the present moment, Verdandi, and results in future consequences, Skuld. This triune force of past, present, and future was called Weird. The giantesses of Weird wove the entire cosmos into being. Nowadays, weird means something strange or supernatural, but to our ancestors, weird meant the life force energy web that encompasses all things, including time and space. We still use this word weird every single day. The European concept of the interconnectedness of all life force energy is so integral to our thought patterns that even Christianity could not erase it from our daily vocabulary. World tree. A fundamental concept found in many animist religions is the world tree. Various shamanic religions, including some Native American pre-Christian European traditions, contain the belief that there are multiple dimensions or worlds that are housed within a multi-branched tree. Neo-shamanism focuses on three worlds, the upper, middle, and lower world. In actuality, however, there are usually 9 worlds associated with the world tree. The Siberian Tengarist religion, from which the word shaman is derived, has 9 branches in its world tree. This coincidentally corresponds with the pre-Christian Scandinavian world tree Yggdrasil, which also has 9 worlds. The shamanic 3 worlds in this tree are represented by the upper world called Asgard, or the fortress of the celestial gods, the middle world called Midgard, or middle fortress, or as it is more commonly known, Middle Earth, and the underworld called Hell. Christianity appropriated the pre-Christian Germanic underworld, Hell, and converted it into a place of eternal torment. However, in pre-Christian Germanic animism, Hell was the underworld where human souls went after death to prepare for rebirth in Middle Earth. Hell was predominantly a place of healing and regeneration. Some souls who had committed atrocities while in Middle Earth underwent temporary self-induced punishment, but there never existed a place of eternal torment in traditional pre-Christian European religions. Thunder beings. All prehistoric Indo-European cultures had a version of a thunder god. Sometimes the Sky Father had a dual role of both Sky Father and thunder god. The Roman god Jupiter and the Greek god Zeus were modeled after this dual Sky Father role. Other Indo-European traditions had a separate deity whose sole function was that of thunder god. Examples of the latter type of thunder god are seen in the Celtic Taranis, the Vedic Indra, the Anglo-Saxon Thunor, and the Scandinavian Thor. In these latter examples, the thunder god is usually the son of the Sky Father and Earth Mother. Ancestor spirits. Honoring the ancestors is fundamental to all original spiritual traditions, regardless of culture anywhere in the world. The Indo-European traditions are no exception to this rule. The Germanic traditions are filled with different types of ancestor worship. I will list a few examples. Hummingja spirits. The Hummingja is a pre-Christian Scandinavian concept. The Hummingja was an ancestral... Here, I'll write this down for you. Hummingja. The Hummingja was an ancestral spirit that was invited into the family home to protect and bring prosperity. The word Hummingja is often translated as luck. A person's luck was thought to be inherited from one's ancestors. Humans were encouraged to welcome and honor the Hummingja as a family member. People could choose to accept or reject a Hummingja spirit. One Viking account of a Hummingja spirit encounter even suggests that a Hummingja spirit could be adopted by another person if the intended recipient rejects his Hummingja. Elves. The word elf can have different meanings. Some elves are mischievous or even harmful. However, the most revered of the elven beings were called the light elves, L-I-G-H-T. According to my research, elves in general are powerful nature spirits, but the light elves fill the role of ascended spiritual masters who guide the human race towards spiritual evolution. Elves also had a strong ancestral connection. While the Hummingja spirits were more concerned with influencing one's physical prosperity, and in my research, I believe are immediate departed ancestors, the elves were more connected to influencing one's spiritual state of being. Tolkien's version of the elf race in his Lord of the Rings books was modeled after the traditional pre-Christian understanding of the light elves. Elf sacrifice. In pre-Christian Scandinavia, autumn was dedicated to elf worship. During the night of the elf sacrifice, Christians were not allowed into pagan households because to do so would bring down the curses of the elves and Odin. One medieval historical account records that some Christians traveling through pagan Scandinavia were caught in a storm and sought shelter in a pagan house. They did not know that this night was the Alfa Blot, or the elf sacrifice. In each instance, the Christians were rudely and sometimes violently chased away by pagan householders. This is not only, like chased off with pitchforks. Like, if you don't get out of here, I'm going to stab you to death. In each instance, the Christians were rudely and sometimes violently chased away by pagan householders. This is interesting because the pre-Christian pagan tradition was to never refuse refuge to a stranger. To refuse hospitality to a stranger was a very serious spiritual offense in polytheist society. However, in each instance, the Christians were chased away. The pre-Christian polytheist understanding was that Christians had abandoned their ancestors and brought ancestral anger onto them. The pagans wanted to make sure that the elves did not mistake those householders for the Christians that were coming seeking shelter. So for pagans to chase off anyone shows how deeply they revered the elves. But what about Santa's elves? Let me dispel some modern misunderstandings concerning these beings. Elves are not tiny sprites or those little people that build toys for Santa. These are representations of modern elves that are actually modeled after the pre-Christian Germanic entities known as dwarves. Elves and dwarves are completely different spiritual beings. Actually, what happened was that during the Christian conversion, people still had such a strong connection to elves and dwarves, even though they were Christians, because it was just part of life for them. Just because they became Christians didn't mean that they stopped believing in the existence of trees or mountains or anything else. Elves and dwarves, Disir, land spirits, trolls, these were all part of everyday life for them. So it didn't make any sense. They weren't educated. So they didn't have a Bible that they read which told them what to believe. They just happened to adopt this belief in some, Jesus who died on some cross. So the church had to come up with ways to ingeniously wipe out this thing that people just accepted as part of their reality. For them, being a Christian and believing in elves and dwarves and trolls, that was not a problem for them, because that was just part of their reality. So the church started dominionizing. I don't know if that's a word. They started dominionizing the dwarves and the elves, and started putting big, curly shoed toes on them, and putting big hats on them, and turning them into, these little sprightly demonic creatures, and they were used as a joke. You made fun of them. So you would go, "Oh, are you worshiping the elves?" Ha ha ha. In other words, they're just silly superstitions. Let's keep going. Stone circles and ancestor worship. Many may not be aware of one of the main functions of stone circles in pre-Christian Europe. Besides being used for observing celestial events such as solstices and equinoxes, stone circles, like Stonehenge, were also temples to the ancestors. Archaeological excavations in Stonehenge have revealed that cremated remains were buried underneath the giant blue stones. During the Viking era, community elders would gather in local stone circles for important meetings where community decisions were made. They gathered at these circles in order to have their consciousness influenced by the presence of the deceased ancestors who dwelt in those circles. It was well known by Vikings that the ashes of powerful deceased leaders were buried on those stone circle sites. Totem Spirit. One of the most popular neo-shamanic practices is to discover one's totem spirit. According to neo-shamanism, a person's totem will be an animal spirit used as a guide and protector in shamanic journeys. Here we have another misapplication of words. Totem is from the Ojibwe tribe in the United States, which means ancestral or family spirit. A totem could also be a personal power symbol. This could be a totem. And again, the spirit is in the symbol. It's not just, you know what I mean? You see, there's just no disconnection. It's all part of the same sort of, what's that word I'm looking for? Holographic understanding of the universe. Once again, neo-shamanism has appropriated a term specific to one Native American culture and applied it arbitrarily to all Native American and shamanic cultures. According to neo-shamanism, the totem is a personal spirit, often an animal, assigned to a person at birth that helps protect and guides the individual throughout their life. So listen to that definition, because this is the neo-shamanic definition of a totem, which they're, again, you got your basic, Caucasian person who's disaffected with modern Western culture, and so he's seeking for something to identify with so he can feel connected and spiritual. So he goes, "Oh yeah, totem. I'm going to do a totem spirit." That's a Native American thing. Totem spirits. And then here will be the definition of it. The totem is a personal spirit, often an animal assigned to a person at birth that helps, protects, and guides the individual throughout their life. Contacting and working with one's totem spirit is one of the main focuses of neo-shamanic practices. So hold that, and then let's talk about the fetch spirit. The concept of a personal helper spirit is also represented in pre-Christian European spirituality. The Germanic traditions, the helper spirit was known as a fetch in English or filcha in Norse. A fetch spirit, which means follow, fetch means to follow. A fetch spirit was often represented as an animal. The fetch would usually appear to the individual in dreams. If a fetch was seen while a person was awake, it was considered a bad omen and may portend a person's impending death. If a fetch was represented as a female human, then it was considered a guardian spirit of one's family or clan. When I was 7 years old, I almost died from scarlet fever. One night, I awoke to see a female spirit standing in my bedroom doorway. She was transparent and highly luminous. She sat on the edge of my bed and told me about my future. Shortly after her appearance, my fever broke and I began to recover from that moment on. When I asked about the experience, I was told by my parents that the woman was my guardian angel. My Anglo-Saxon ancestors would have identified her as a guardian fetch spirit connected to my clan. It really was one of the most powerful experiences of my life. I don't talk about it anymore here, but I had scarlet fever, which I don't even know if people get nowadays, but it sounds like such a medieval type thing. But I had scarlet fever, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I could feel that I was sort of lying on top of myself. I was hovering above myself, and I was looking into my doorway. As a little kid, I was afraid of the dark, so I always had the door open with the hall light on. And so in the hallway was this really bright figure. I mean, it was so bright, I couldn't even see anything. I couldn't see the face. There was just this huge spotlight coming from where the face should have been. I could see that there was a gown that went all the way down to the floor. I had the feeling that it was a woman, although I couldn't see any features. And in my little 7-year-old brain, I said, even though I can't see her face, I can tell she's smiling. So there was this smiling, bright female figure standing in the doorway staring at me. And I'm getting all of these, really good vibes and kind of, transfixed on it. And then I hear my mother coming up the stairs. My mother, whatever negative things I might say about my mom, she always had this instinct. She knew when I was, in trouble. And so she would just know when she needed to come and take care of me. So I could hear her coming up the stairs and almost running down the hallway. And then I watched her as she then walked right through this spirit. And then when she bent down to touch me, I woke up in my body and I was in huge amounts of pain and, all the stuff that happens when your fever's so high you're about to die. And then after that, according to her, she says that after, she put me in the bath and got my fever down, and then when I was okay, she slept in the other bed because I had, 2 beds in that room. She slept in the other bed, and according to her, I told her that then that night the angel came back and sat on the edge of the bed and told me my future. I don't remember that. She might not be remembering it accurately either, but I do remember as I sat, before that all happened, and I'm looking up at this being, that's staring at me from the doorway. There were no words that were exchanged, but I definitely got this download of information that I have ever since, I'm still decoding it. And what was told to me was that the first half of your life is going to be hard, which it was. I wouldn't wish the first half of my life on anybody. And the first half of your life is going to be hard, but the second half of your life, that's when you're really going to come into your own, and then, all that other stuff. At that time, I really wasn't understanding anything that was being said to me other than there was all this love coming at me. But since then, even in my 20s and 30s and 40s, I look back on that and I held on to that because that got me through, things that I think would have destroyed other people. Just the knowledge that, I just got to hang on because it's going to get better. So that definitely, I think, was an ancestor spirit that came and, in that near-death experience, came and gave me that message, which has helped define my whole life ever since. All right, let's keep going. Familiar spirit. In medieval Europe, a familiar spirit was considered a spirit helper used by witches to accomplish their magical rites. A familiar was often represented as an animal, but could also take the form of a human, humanoid, or even a mythical creature. Familiar spirits were oftentimes gifted to an individual by a family member or fellow magical practitioner. These kinds of familiars would often appear when the individual was in physical danger to guide or protect them. The obvious conclusion here is that it is completely unnecessary for modern Westerners to look outside of their own culture for the totem concept. I am of the belief that this concept of the spirit helper is so deeply ingrained in the European psyche that our modern neo-shamanic obsession with them is actually our own ancestral memories of this practice, seeking a means of expression, and because we don't have any conscious awareness that this is actually our tradition, we project it onto neo-shamanism or, pseudo-Native American shamanism. We project it on there and think that we're practicing some Native American thing, when in reality we're just looking for some symbol that we can project our own cultural and DNA memories onto. So now that I've given this to you, you no longer have to do that. You no longer, and the problem, why is this a problem? It's not a problem for me that somebody takes on the concept of some other culture. I don't care about that. The problem is that it's impossible to do that when your whole reason for wanting to be Native American shaman is because you can't stand your own family and your own culture, understandably. You're filled with guilt and shame over what your ancestors have done to, traditional indigenous people. And so when you adopt their religion as a way of trying to run away from yourself, you can't avoid the unconscious conflict. This is what Native Americans are pointing to when they call people plastic shamans. They're not really all that upset that people are trying to practice some kind of traditional religion. What bothers them is that they can feel that you are in conflict with yourself, and that you are taking all of that self-hatred and you're trivializing somebody else's practice out of your desperate need to connect to your own tradition, which of course that's not your fault, because you have no way of knowing that that's your tradition, because we're told that we're Christians and that we sort of sprouted out of the ground in Europe somewhere around 400 or 500 AD. And before then, there were these other people in Europe that we look upon as these sort of alien monsters that we call the barbarians. But those are our ancestors. And those traditions want to come through us. And so that's why they come up with these terms like guardian angel and things like that. There's nothing in the Bible about a guardian angel. There's no such concept. The concept of the Trinity, that's not in the Bible either. That's projected because Odin, Vili, and Ve. We worship the Trinity of Odin, Vili, and Ve, who created the universe. And this idea of elves and nature spirits and fetch spirits, we all have that within us, and so we project that onto the closest earth-centered indigenous tradition that's in front of us, and we project it onto Native Americans, and so we adopt it thinking we're adopting another tradition and running away from ourselves, when in reality we're just projecting what's inside of us, and we should just be okay with that and just own that. And then we can actually heal, because the other thing that's important is to continuously chase after something that has not been rightfully given to you, and to do it while hating yourself unconsciously in the process, continues to cause damage. And it does the exact opposite of what you want it to do, which is, again, what Native Americans are trying to tell us when they say, stop doing that. They're not just saying it's offensive to us, they're also saying it's demeaning to you. You're damaging yourself by the internal conflict, the self-hatred that you have within yourself, by needing to be somebody else. You're damaging yourself. And they're saying, I don't want that crap on me. It's like when you're around somebody who's really like codependent and just an ass kisser and just like, so, you don't want them around. It's like, get away from me. I don't like that. That's what they're trying to say. They may not realize it, but that's what Native Americans are really trying to say. Underneath all of the obvious, offense from somebody stealing their tradition. All right. So let me read it here. The obvious conclusion here is that it is completely unnecessary for modern Westerners to look outside of their own culture for the totem concept. I am of the belief that this concept of the spirit helper is so deeply ingrained in the European psyche that our modern neo-shamanic obsession with them is actually our own ancestral memories of this practice seeking a means of expression. Since most moderners have not been taught that spirit guides and protectors are part of the European spiritual heritage, we instinctively seek out foreign practices that can reunite us with our personal and clan protectors. By the way, that was told to me. I remember I had one of the guys that was in the Taoist spirit fighting practice with me. He was full-blooded Navajo. And I told him about that experience long before this, and he said, "Oh, that was one of your ancestors." He said, "That was one of your ancestors checking up on you." It's every indigenous practice understands this. The European Christian tradition is trying to talk you out of those things. So it's not just a Native American thing. It's in every tradition in the world. Everybody understands that your ancestors are there to guide you and take care of you. But it's not, it's blasphemy to say that, your ancestors are doing it. So the Catholics call them saints, and then the born-again Christians will call it, a guardian angel. All right, let's see. There's more here. I'll do this last one. Shape-shifting. This is another concept that oftentimes is identified solely with shamanism. Shape-shifting was widely practiced in pre-Christian Europe. Berserkers. Our modern phrase to go berserk comes from the Viking Age practice of warriors who would summon the power of the bear or wolf in battle. A berserker would put themselves into a state of deep trance where the power of the animal would possess their bodies and make them invincible in battle. The word berserk is a compound of two words, bear and serk. Bear means bear and serk means coat. So bear coat. So a berserker is literally someone who wears a bear coat. Berserkers would typically wear the pelt of either a wolf or bear into battle. The berserker clearly reflects a very ancient animist shape-shifting practice among the Germanic tribes. There are other legends concerning the ability of some Viking warrior wizards who had the ability to shapeshift in what we would describe as shamanic journeying with dramatic results in the real world. According to the legends, these warrior wizards would go to sleep in a location adjacent to the battlefield. At the precise time that the warrior or wizard was sleeping, bears or wolves would magically appear on the battlefield and participated in the fighting. Once the warrior awoke from his trance, the spirit animals mysteriously disappeared. Witches reportedly had the ability to become birds or other animals and travel to distant locations for their magical works. Instances of shape-shifting in European animism is very prevalent. All one needs to do is a small bit of research to discover the depth of this belief in Western culture. And of course, again, this is something that people ascribe to other traditions, Native American, blah, 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 but it's as European as it gets. You can't get more European than the idea of shape-shifting or becoming a bird or any of that stuff. It's part of our culture, it's part of our DNA, it's part of who we are, which is why we love it, which is why we see it in, what was that, what the heck was that? That's that sci-fi thing that was, what the hell was that? The White Walkers and all that, and the guy becomes the Raven, all that stuff. That stuff is so popular in our science fiction because it's part of who we are. All right, so that's it. I'm gonna stop right there on page 61, just before shamanic journeying. So. And I will be happy to now take questions. Again, this is a question and answer. If you have a question, write the word question, have a question, answer it after it, and I'll be happy to answer it. The best way to interact with me is to have a question, an honest question. Other than that, you you run the risk of me psychoanalyzing you. And trust me, you don't want that. All right, so let's see here. Zach Jackson. If you have a question, do me a favor and write the word question. I'm going to read this. I don't know if it's a question or not, but you said yesterday, you said, "What's this to my right?" and I said a chair. Then we got confused because you meant the yellow box, not the chair. Yeah, okay. That's right. The reason why is because you had asked me. You asked me the question, what is the 90-day challenge? And if you look on the screen, what is next to my head? This giant yellow box that says the 90-day challenge. So I was giving you a hard time because I said the two most important things in life is to pay attention and put effort. And you threw up the question, but you didn't bother to pay attention and put the effort to look at what was staring you in the face, which was that. So yeah, I was making fun of you. I was giving you a hard time, but it was all in good fun. I was telling you, you wanted to know what the 90-day challenge was. It's amazing to me that I've got all these links and people don't put any effort into looking at what's right, staring them in the face. I understand it. You're not alone. Everybody does it. Let's see what else. I'm looking for the questions here. So again, if you have a question, write the word question. Garo Camarillo. Yeah, I do remember you. I do remember you, Gabo. She says, would light elves in ascended thought not have accepted Christian strangers into households? In other words, you're asking me, were our ancestors justified in their actions? That's a good question. And I'm not going to make a decision one way or another. We can look back on it now and think badly about those Christians whose conscious intent was probably nothing, they thought they were doing God's will. But the truth of the matter is that they're that pain in the ass, that pain in the ass relative that comes over. And, you're having a family gathering and they want to come over and read a Bible verse and tell you why you need to become a Mormon. You put up with them because they're your uncle or your whatever, but nobody wants to hear it. And it just, everybody can't stand it. The other thing is that even though those Christians that I mentioned were missionaries, by the way, they were there in that part of the world at that time to convert people to Christianity. So everybody knew who these people were. They weren't just people of another religion, and they weren't being rejected just for that thing. They were, they're walking around with these giant crosses, and understand at that point in time, people were losing their indigenous culture and way of life, and their connection to their ancestors was being destroyed by these well-meaning, pain-in-the-ass people who were their European relatives, whatever. And so they, people put up with them, but it wasn't that there wasn't a feeling of the damage that these people were doing. And look at the damage that they caused. I shared about this recently, but there was another historical accounting of one of these same, a Catholic priest, and he's in, I think it was Norway. And, the guy there was just converting to Christianity. He was an elder, and he had lands, and he had money, and he needed to be able to do business with Christians. So the thing to do is you had to become a Christian, because otherwise Christians wouldn't do business with you. And if you didn't do business with the Christians, you went broke. And maybe if you had people that were dependent upon you and upon your goods, and maybe you had, servants or other people that you had to take care of, or people that worked for you, or, then you had to, in order to make sure that people got fed. So more than likely, this guy wasn't religious. He was just doing whatever he had to do to function in life. And along comes this Catholic priest who goes onto the land, and they knew that in the land the ancestors lived. So the ancestors lived in the rocks and in the trees. And so he's going around to the rocks and the trees, and he's shaking the holy water, and he's casting out the demons. And the guy's probably just, going over his books and, yeah, whatever. Can we do business now? That same night, after that happens, his father and his grandfather comes to him in a dream and says, "What the hell are you doing? Why are you kicking us off the land? We're here to protect you." So understand that these innocent Christians who are getting kicked off of people's lands are doing really destructive things that these people, some knew and some didn't, but they had to tolerate it, because if they didn't, they couldn't function. But this was the night of worshiping the elves, and the elves were not going to let their time of worship be sullied by these people whose intent was to get rid of the elves. So that's why in that instance, you're asking me, would this have been, an ascended action? I think both sides have an argument. Because if you look at the long haul, what those Christians ended up doing when they were there innocently traveling through Norway is they were not only converting people to Christianity, but they were telling them that worshiping of the elves was worshiping demons, and your ancestors are in hell, and all kinds of really destructive things. So I don't have those people didn't need to be there. It was their choice to get up from their Christian homeland and come to another country where people worshipped a different way, and they were fully responsible for them going and trying to, stuff their religion down other people's throats. So they knew what they were doing. There was that guy who went to I forget the name of those islands. Somebody will remind me. There's an island in the Indian Ocean that still has the original indigenous people that have been there for 50,000 years or whatever it is, who've never had any contact with the outside world. They've had a little bit of contact in 1700s, which resulted in everybody getting sick from diseases that they didn't have any immunity to. So they rightly came to the conclusion that anybody that comes from outside their island is a demon. And so anybody that goes anywhere near, if you even, on a boat, go anywhere near them, you'll get killed, or they'll throw spears at you or arrows. They don't want you there on their, what they probably believe is, the real world, and you're coming from some alien place. And there was this Christian guy who decided he was going to go convert them. So he showed up and they killed him. And I don't have any empathy for that guy. He knew what he was getting into. He knew what was going to happen. And the rest of us who aren't Christian know that stay the hell away. It's none of your business what they do. They don't have to become Christians just because you got that screwed up idea in your head. That's not their problem. So same thing here. This is a milder version of that, but these were people coming over to Norway to stuff their religion down people's throats who've been practicing this for tens of thousands of years, and it was part of their culture, it was part of their religion, and this was the most holy night of all, because this was the night of the ascended masters, the elves, and here come these guys who have no clue what the hell they're doing, and you better not step on my land with that filth on you. So I don't have any empathy for those guys. They could have stayed home. They didn't have to travel to another country during the rainy season. They didn't have to do that. That was completely their choice. All right, so let's see what else. CRA question: why do you not use seether instead of shaman? Isn't it the word for ancestors' practice of Germanic animism? Yes and no. The word seether is a very specific practice. That, again, this is kind of what modern neo-heathens do. Neo-heathens make the same kind of mistakes that neo-shamans do. They, you may not realize it, but you are actually trying to project onto your ancestors neo-shamanism. I understand it, but you're minimizing and simplifying the practice of seethe. So there were two practices. There was seethe and there was galder. Galder means chant. And the people who practiced galder were males mostly, and we would call them wizards. These are the guys who came up with the rituals, how you do the ritual, when you do the ritual. Okay, at this time, astrologically, this comes up here, and you say this exact chant this way, and you offer this offering to this god, and you do this on this day. It was very well thought out. What a Vedic would call a tantra. They were tantric. They had very specific rules to how you perform certain things in order to have the gods come down and do all that. That was the practice of Galder. And then seethe meant to boil, and it simply means to channel the gods. So this would be where you prophesy. You go into shamanic trance and the gods mount you and you prophesy. You have unwittingly, without realizing it, been bitten by the neo-shamanism, superficial, just stereotyping it all together, because that's what we, like you said, shamanism, seethers. But it was one of many practices. And so that's why I don't use the word seethe, because I'm not talking about the one tiny bit of our ancestors' practice. Seethe, and to make seethe into shamanism is minimizing shamanism into just the fact of going into trance and channeling the gods. That's only one tiny aspect of shamanism or animism. So that's why I don't use the word, because that's like, the reason why people think that tantra means sex is because in the Vedic tradition there is a practice called tantra. Tantra means technique. And Tantra is doing a ritual. You say this mantra on this day with this, the moon is in this phase, and you offer this thing, and you do it facing in this direction, and you say this, and then the deity, and during that time you don't drink, you don't smoke, you don't have sex. These are all aspects of Tantra. 1% of Tantra is sexual practices. And even among those sexual practices, they're done to channel the gods, and men don't orgasm, and so it's not about sex. So it's one type of ritual spiritual practice that involves sex, and it's 1% of Tantra. But what do people in the West do? When you talk about Tantra, people think tantric sex. Go and type in tantric sex, and you're going to get all this stuff about spiritual sex and learning how to connect the male and the female. It is just so superficially stereotyped, and it's because some Westerner went to India and heard about this thing called Tantra, and one of the guys doing Tantra happened to be practicing tantric sex, and he thought that was great, and he came back to Europe or the States and said, oh yeah, Tantra means sex, and so now people think tantric sex means something, and it doesn't. Same thing with yoga. You ask somebody about yoga, they think yoga is doing stretching, and when you talk about the stretching part of yoga, they don't even know what that is, but they're only talking about hatha yoga, and that came from Westerners going to India, wanting to learn from spiritual masters. Oh, you mean the yogi? Yoga means union. And so the master of the spirituality would be called the yogi. And they would say to the yogi, oh, Master Yogi, I want to learn from you. And he says, oh, great, do these stretches. And he teaches them hatha yoga. And so they spend 6 months or a year, maybe 2 years, and they master these hatha yoga practices, and then they go back to Europe or the States and they say, I've mastered yoga, and it's this. But they didn't stay long enough to hear the yogi say, oh yeah, hatha yoga means balancing the two halves of the body, the male and the female, and we're doing these stretches and we're doing this breathing so that we can stimulate the kundalini and connect the male and female, so that when we do the real meditations, which might include Tantra, when we do the real meditations, your body will be able to handle the energy. They didn't stay long enough to learn that. And so people think yoga is stretching, and it's not. It's just one aspect. And that's why we have all these Iyengar and hot yogas, and we have people who spend their whole lives trying to master this one person's interpretation of yoga. So much so, no, it's not like this. Your nose isn't here. Your nose is bent this way, and you're 1/2 of an inch this way, and that's the correct way to do the. And they have no understanding that the yoga that they're practicing is just the preliminary exercises to the deeper spiritual practices. And you don't realize it with your question, CRA, but that's what you're doing, or you've heard it from somewhere else. People want to be shamans and they want to do it the right way, so they say, oh, there's this thing called seed. I rendered it. It meant channeling the gods. That's shamanism. It's only one aspect. So I hope I answered your question there. Blue Indigo asks me, again, if you have a question, write the word question. Have you tried ayahuasca? Blue Indigo says. I invite you to watch my channel. I assume you're new to my channel. And go and learn how to search within my channel. Let me give that little spiel here. So the best way to make use of my channel is to watch my videos. There are now almost 1,000 videos on my channel now, which is a lot. So I understand there's a hell of a lot of videos to watch. So learn how to search within a channel. Now, if you don't know how to do that, figure that out. On my laptop, when I go onto the thunderwizard.com YouTube page, because you can just go to the YouTube page, you'll see a menu, and on the right-hand side, you'll see a magnifying glass. Click on that, and then you can put in whatever term you want. You want to put in hallucinogens, ayahuasca, power plants. You can see all of the videos where I talk about it in depth. On a laptop or a phone, you're going to have to find some other scroll down menu where you can get a search bar and type in whatever you want. So Blue Indigo, I recommend that you do research on my channel to find out if I've done ayahuasca and what I think about it. All right. I don't see any more questions. Vincent.thunderwizard.com. You can see him there. You can go to his website, and he is one of my astrologers. If you want to get an astrology reading from me, I charge a lot more than a lot of guys on my channel. So he has been trained in my type of astrology. So if you want to get a reading from him, go ahead and check his page out. I don't see any more questions here. So you know how it works. We've been on for, how long have we been on for? Been on for a while. Been on for an hour and a half. If you have any questions, now's the time to ask it. You can ask me anything you want. Hopefully you're going to ask about what I've talked about and or what I teach. In the meantime, we're going to go ahead and I'll give you some time to think up your question while we hear about why you should go to thunderwizard.com and subscribe for the 90-day challenge. I won't talk about it specifically, but my friend Arnold will mention why you should subscribe.
Hey there, this is Arnold. I have a very important announcement. I command you to listen to me. This is Arnold Swears He's Bigger, and I'm here to tell you something very important. You must go to thunderwizard.com YouTube channel, subscribe and hit the bell button. I command you to do this. It's the most important thing you're ever going to do in your life. If you don't listen to me now and hear me later and go and subscribe, I'm going to come to your house and I'm going to shame you in front of your whole family. I'm going to go to your school and I'm going to chastise you in front of your friends. I'm going to go to your church. I'm going to stand in front of the whole congregation and I'm going to tell people how stupid you are for not going and subscribing to this channel. I tell you now, it's the most important thing you're ever going to do. You have to go and subscribe right now, otherwise my head is going to explode. Do it now, I command you.
All right. I don't see any more questions, so I guess we're done for the day. Hang on a second here. All right. So we're done for the day. Again, I recommend, if you want to know what's going on with the 90-day practice, this is, again, we do a lot of talking. And I enjoy doing the talking, but talking will get you this far. You need to do the work. Some people want to have more instruction than just me giving you a list of here, do this, sit here and do that. This is something that I do. And I've now got the morning practice, the midday practice, and the evening practice. And I give you a complete practice, and you can follow me as you do it. You follow along. All you got to do is hit play. You hit play and you do what I do. And you can see me doing it with you, doing the postures, doing the breathing, doing the whatever. And the idea is, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find how I can most effectively teach people how to change their life, to change their mindset, and specifically to change your vibration. Change the vibration of your cells in your body. When you do that, you vibrate on a higher level, and then you don't have to do all this thinking. You don't have to do all this talking. If you're at that place where you've heard me talk about how to do all this stuff and what you need to change in your mind and all that, but you're still running into blocks, you're still full of fear and doubt and victim mentality, and you're trying to do it, but nothing's changing in your life, means that, among other things, you need to change the vibration of the energy of your body. And so in the morning practice, I help you align the compass of your soul, which is in your heart, to your true path. You don't know what your soul desire is? That's okay, you can be confused. That morning practice is about helping you to align to that. It awakens the Kundalini. The Kundalini is your human spiritual power that allows you to evolve to your highest essence. And the practices are very simple. I go straight to the most powerful and most simple practices, so you don't have to bend yourself into pretzels or anything like that. Anybody should be able to do it. And then I give you the midday practice, which is a meditation on the three selves, which allows you to, go over where you've aligned yourself, and to look at how you're responding to your day, your conditioned thinking as opposed to your original essence. And then in the nighttime practice, we do some deep qigong and meditation, and I take you through some practices. And the idea is it connects all three of the selves, but most specifically, it'll connect your heart to your navel. Your navel has to be empowered with your soul desire. It's one thing to know what your soul desire is, and it's another thing when you implant that into your navel, into your unconscious mind, then you program your unconscious mind to go create your reality. So that's what this whole 90-day challenge is. We've got the first phase, which is morning, noon, and evening practices. And even if you just do that for 30 days, I can guarantee you massive shift. What exactly will happen, you'll have to find out. But this is what I do. You want to understand what I do? This is how I change the vibration in my body so that I can be where I'm at now, which is I just simply become aware of what I want, and it happens. If you want that, do that with me and change yourself. Let's see, what else? RCHPA ashtray. I wish I knew it. What does that mean? Yeah, and people should really think about the names they give themselves. I don't know what RHCP ashtray means, but is that something that you want to vibrate in your aura? This person says, question, what is the primary focus someone with Aries in the 12th house do during this retrograde? Aries in the 12th house, again, it's not really enough information because I need to know. So you're a Pisces, and I don't know anything else. I don't know what's aspecting it. I don't know where your Mars is in your chart. I don't know your Aruda. I don't know so many different things, which I'm not asking that you tell me, because if you want that, you can get a reading from me or from vincent.thunderwizard.com. Let's see. But what is happening right now, let's see if it's gone through it. So this is an interesting thing because I'm feeling it as well. What happened recently, a while back, is that Mars was in Pisces, and it was retrograde in Pisces, and then it turned around and it went direct, and it started coming out of Pisces towards Aries. And if you remember that, which was 3 or 4 weeks ago, if you remember that, there was a lot of challenge, and people felt stuck, and people were getting angry, and there was a lot of conflicts and things like that. That's because Mars, the warrior, was stuck in this watery sign of Pisces, and he was trying to get out of Pisces into Aries. And so as Mars was trying to get out of Pisces into Aries, Mars gets really frustrated because Mars is this fiery planet of action, and he's in this, deep underwater in this meditative sign. And so he's being, it's like the fires, somebody's pouring water on the fire, and it's making him unhappy and uncomfortable. And so I felt really stuck and depressed. And then when Mars went after it went retrograde, when it went direct again and went into Aries, then all of a sudden, I felt this relief, and I felt like I could accomplish all these things, and I got a lot of work done. So now Mars is retrograde again, and let's see, I don't think he has yet, but he's about to go back into Pisces like very soon. So he might have already done it, but I haven't looked at it in the last couple of days, so let me see. Mars is now in Aries. Mars is at 0 degrees. So Mars is on the border. Mars is stepping into Pisces, which means he's going from his state of power, which is Aries. The most powerful expression of Mars is in the sign of Aries, or one of the most powerful. That's his sign. He's really in himself right now. And now he has to go step back into the wading pool. He has to go jump in the cold water. He doesn't want to go there. So what's going to end up happening is that Mars is going to go back into Pisces, and he's going to revisit the issues that he dealt with a month ago. So the things that you were dealing with, if you had frustrations a month ago, you're going to have to go back and revisit those. And this time you're going to resolve it again. And then Mars is going to turn direct again. And then by the end of the year, by the beginning of next year, Mars will be back into Aries. So we'll have a good start for the next year. Mars will want to go forward and accomplish things. So your ascendant, if you're in Vedic astrology, your ascendant is your sign. So you're saying your ascendant is, what did you say? Aries in the 12th house. Aries in the 12th house. So your first house is what? Your what is it? Sorry, my brain just farted on me here. So primary focus was somebody with Aries in the 12th house. So your first house is Taurus, right? So that's your ascendant. And so that means Mars is going to come into your ascendant in your 11th house, right? 12th, 11th, right. So it's going to go back into your 11th house. So Mars is going to want to bring back some issues having to do with your success, because the 11th house is the gains, with the work that you do to gain things in your life. So it has to do with your success, business, that kind of thing. So Mars is going to go back into the 11th house of gains, and it's an uncomfortable place for Mars to be. So I don't know how that's going to affect you, but that's going to be the focus. The focus is going to be your gains, other things. You give me some other stuff, but like I said, I don't want to do a reading on you. I don't want to take up that time. If you want to do that, feel free to go get a reading from me or from one of my other apprentices. All right, let's see what else. Is that it? Charbel says some nice things to me. Thank you very much. Okay, that's it. All right, I'm done. Yeah, do this. I dare you. Thunderwizard.com is the Thunderwizard.com is the subscription site for me and this channel. If you want to support this channel, if you want to see me continue to come onto the channel and keep doing this kind of stuff, then go and subscribe at whatever level you want. That's really what pays my bills, is those subscriptions. So if you want to keep me on the air and you want to show me some love, go do that. And when you subscribe at any level, um, $25 or above, you get access to hundreds and hundreds of hours of in-depth video that you can't get on this channel. Very specific things. Mastery of shamanism, the manifestation mastery course, and the 90-day challenge, which I think is the most powerful thing that I've offered to date. So you can go check that out. Charbel has thrown $14.99. Is that Australian? I don't know what that is. There's an A dollar sign. I guess that means Australian. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That's a hefty little contribution. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. All right, everybody. That's it for me. I worked out really hard last night, so I'm getting tired. I need to go take a nap and drink some protein powder so I get myself all big and strong again and keep myself healthy so I don't get too old. I'm in denial of how old I am, and I'm going to stay in denial for as long as possible. And that's one of the ways I do it. All right, that's it for me. Thanks to everybody again. Have a great Saturday if you're in the United States. And everybody stay healthy and safe. And isn't it ironic that Donald Trump got COVID? I'll just leave it at that. It's one of the most ironic things I've ever seen. And we all wish him and his wife to get well as quickly as possible. And let's hope there are no complications and he can get right back into the debates and, he can, things will get back to normal. Let's hope. Whatever the hell that means. That's it for me. I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.